An administrator at a large university is interested in determining whether the residential status of a student is associated with level of participation in extracurricular activities. Residential status is categorized as on-campus for students living in university housing and off-campus otherwise. A simple random sample of 100 students in the university was taken, and each student was asked the following two questions. Are you an on-campus student or an off-campus student? In how many extracurricular activities do you participate? The responses of the 100 students are summarized in the frequency table shown. A. Calculate the proportion of on-campus students in the sample who participate in at least one extracurricular activity and the proportion of off-campus students in the sample who participate in at least one extracurricular activity. The responses of the 100 students are summarized in the segmented bar graph shown. Let the variable x represent the number of extracurricular activities students participate in. The proportions we have to calculate are equivalent to probabilities. So the computation of these proportions are the computation of conditional probabilities. The first one, the proportion of on-campus students in the sample who participate in at least one extracurricular activity, is the conditional probability that x is more or equal than 1 given that the students live on campus. The proportion of off-campus students in the sample who participate in at least one extracurricular activity is going to be the conditional probability of the variable x more or equal than 1 given that the students live off campus. To calculate the conditional probabilities from the frequency table, we have to focus on the corresponding on-campus and off-campus columns. Then, the proportion of students participating in more than one extracurricular activities given that live on campus will be the addition of the corresponding values for one activity and two or more activities under the on-campus column. To compute this probability, we have to add the fraction 17 over 33 plus 7 over 33. The result will be approximately 0.727. In the same way, the computation of the proportion of students participated in more than one activity given that they live off campus will be the addition of the values for one activity and two or more activities under the off-campus column. This probability will be now approximately equals to 0.552. An alternative procedure to find these same proportions is using the segmented bar graph. The length of the segments in this bar represents the proportion of students participating in none, one, or more than one activity. In the case of the students living on campus, you only have to add those portions for the one or two or more activities, but it's going to give you 72.7%. In the same way, if you add the one activity portion and two or more activity portions in the corresponding off-campus bar, you are going to find that the portion of students participating in more than one activity living off-campus will be 55.2%. B. Write a few sentences summarizing what the graph reveals about the association between residential status and level of participation in extracurricular activities among the 100 students in the sample. At a first glance, we can see from the bar graph that the on-campus resident students participate in extracurricular activities more than off-campus resident students. Focusing in the corresponding two or more activity portions of the bars, we can see that the proportion of students from each group participating in two or more extracurricular activities is practically the same, but it is a little bit greater for on-campus residents. Paying attention now to the corresponding section of one activity in the bars, we can see that the portion of students participating in one extracurricular activity only is larger for the on-campus residents. Finally, it's easy to see that off-campus resident students have the greatest proportion of students not participating in extracurricular activities. C. After verifying that the conditions for inference were satisfied, the administrator performed a chi-square test of the following hypothesis. Null hypothesis. There is no association between residential status and level of participation in extracurricular activities among the students at the university. Alternate hypothesis. There is an association between residential status and level of participation in extracurricular activities among the students at the university. The test resulted in a p-value of 0.23. Based on the p-value, what conclusion should the administrator make? To perform this chi-square test, we are going to restate the two hypotheses briefly. The null hypothesis will state that residential status and level of participation are independent. The alternate hypothesis will state that residential status and level of participation are not independent. For this problem, we don't have given a level of significance, but usually the level of significance alpha range from 0.1 to 0.01. For this problem, the p-value obtained from the chi-square test was 0.23, and this value is greater than any of the usual values, 0.1 to 0.01. So, there is not enough evidence from this test to reject the null hypothesis. We may conclude that this sample does not provide strong evidence to think that the student's residence on campus or off campus affects significantly the level of participation in extracurricular activities.